Richardson moves to amend Senate File Number 4091, the fourth engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A33.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I present the amendment, I'd like to request a roll call, please.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment takes additional steps to curb the rise in catalytic converter thefts in our state, and it reflects an approach that is supported by the International Association of Auto Theft Investigators, which includes law enforcement, the insurance industry, and other businesses who share a common goal of combating vehicle thefts or vehicle crimes, rather. This amendment requires that in order to purchase a detached catalytic converter, they would need to be marked with a VIN number or some other alternative number that can be tracked by law enforcement, requires scrap dealers to train staff on additional catalytic converter transaction requirements, and also track which employees are completing transactions. There's a requirement that dealers retain records for catalytic converter transactions for 3 years and creates a holding period for 7 days. It directs auto dealers to mark catalytic converters and also has penalties for violations of this section. And finally, it gives permissive authority to the Commerce Department through its auto theft prevention program to conduct audits on scrap metal dealers to ensure compliance.
There's an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Rasmussen moves to amend the Richard Amendment to Senate File Number 4091, the fourth engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A35.
The member from Otter Tail, Representative Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would request a roll call vote on the amendment.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The rise in catalytic converter theft is a serious problem across all of Minnesota, and we need to focus on holding criminals accountable and not pushing costly regulations onto businesses that are doing their job. The Richardson Amendment focuses on punishing Minnesota businesses, not punishing the criminals who commit these crimes. For example, the Minnesota Auto Dealers Association estimates that Subdivision 14 alone will cost dealers and ultimately consumers at least $100 million per year in additional costs to comply. And just to put that in context, Madam Speaker and members, that's more than the estimated cost of catalytic converter theft in Minnesota currently. And just to make this real for members here in the room, just for example, in Representative Richardson's district, where there's a lot of auto dealers, this would cost auto dealers and consumers at least $1.6 million per year. In Representative Berg's district, which also has a lot of auto dealers, it would be about $1.5 million per year to comply with this new mandate. And in Leader Winkler's district, also a lot of auto dealers, and it would cost about $1.7 million per year just for the dealers in that district. So, Madam Speaker and members, this is going to result in a lot of costs for consumers that are unnecessary. In addition, the Richardson Amendment includes more regulations for scrap recyclers that don't improve safety. Minnesota already has very strict requirements for scrap recyclers, including having to record the face of everyone selling scrap and the vehicle and license plate with an HD camera, in addition to taking copies of IDs and an affidavit that this scrap being sold is theirs to sell. Catalytic converter thieves can and do go to other states without Minnesota's strict regulations. So adding more regulations on Minnesota businesses won't deter this crime. We need to focus on the criminals to stop this crime. The A35 amendment would remove the unnecessary and costly burdens on Minnesota businesses and instead would focus on punishing the criminals who commit these thefts. In addition to criminal penalties for unlawful possession of catalytic converters, my amendment would also require anyone convicted to provide restitution to victims. And I think we can all agree that that's the least that we can do as a legislature, is to ensure that restitution is given to the victims of this crime. So let's punish criminals, not Minnesota businesses and consumers. I would ask and encourage a yes vote on the amendment to the amendment.
The member from Anoka, Representative Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise in very strong opposition to the Rasmussen amendment to the amendment which guts the Richardson amendment, takes out many of the most important tools we have to combat catalytic converter theft, and does nothing to help victims of catalytic converter theft whatsoever. I want to start with where Representative Rasmussen concluded by talking about adding restitution to the bill. I think, as members know, I'm a prosecutor. I want you to know that this language is not unnecessary and doesn't add anything. Victims of convicted crimes are entitled to restitution under Minnesota law. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look at Minnesota statute 611A.04, which says a victim of a crime has a right to receive restitution as part of a disposition of a criminal charge or juvenile delinquency proceeding against the offender if the offender is convicted or found delinquent. Victim of a crime has a right to restitution. So what this amendment does is it adds what I would call comfort language around restitution, and then takes away all of the burden, all of the responsibility on auto dealers and on scrap yards to actually do something about this problem. What we see here is that Representative Rasmussen is saying that there's already a lot of requirements on scrap dealers. So if you are comfortable with the status quo, if you believe enough is being done already to combat catalytic converter theft, and that enough is being done to dry up the market for stolen catalytic converters, then absolutely vote for this amendment. But if you want to protect your constituents and dry up the market and hold people who are purchasing stolen catalytic converters accountable for what they're doing, then you should vote no. So I'm very happy we have a roll call amendment on this, because I think it's very important that we send a clear message about what this House intends, and I'd ask members for a red vote on this amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment to the amendment. Representative Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And I just want to be clear that in this amendment, it provides more than simple comfort language. It explicitly points out that the costs and expenses of replacing a catalytic converter, which has been pointed out, is covered under the restitution costs under Minnesota law. And in addition to that, members, I was glad to hear that Representative Stevenson, did acknowledge that the Richardson amendment, without my amendment, is a burden on Minnesota businesses and consumers. And without adding this amendment to the amendment, it is at least $100 million in extra costs that will be paid by auto dealers and consumers across the state of Minnesota. And it's important to recognize that even if catalytic converters are stolen in Minnesota, they are not necessarily being sold to other people in Minnesota, but are going across state lines where states have fewer regulations than we already have in place. And so, Madam Speaker, I would request members to support the amendment to the amendment. Let's focus on punishing criminals who are committing crimes and having restitution for victims, instead of just adding unnecessary, burdensome costs on Minnesota businesses and consumers.
So typically the author speaks last. Okay. All right. There being no further discussion on the amendment to the amendment, the clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk call the names of those members who have not yet voted?
Bernardi.
Bernardi, no.
Bernardi, no. Bliss.
Bliss, aye.
Bliss, aye. Damath.
Damath votes yes.
Dameth, aye. Grossel.
Grossel, aye.
Grossel, aye. Hausman.
Hausman, no.
Hausman, no. Herr.
Herr votes no.
Herr, no. Morrison. Morrison, no. Pearson.
Pearson, aye.
Pearson, aye. Ryer.
Ryer, no.
Ryer, no. Schumacher.
Schumacher, aye.
Schumacher, aye. Thompson.
Thompson, no.
Thompson, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 62 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment to the amendment is not adopted. Back to the underlying amendment discussion. The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I got to say I'm a little dumbfounded by this, and thank you, Representative Rasmussen, for trying to fix what the Democrats have once again done. But we have been seeing a theme throughout our session here of finding any excuse to protect criminals, to protect the people who are actually the problem. And here we have another bill that we all know we've got a major problem with catalytic converter thefts in the state of Minnesota. I think the Democrats have finally recognized and admitted we've got a problem here, which is the good news. But their answer to this is to put an enormous onus on people selling cars instead of the criminals who are stealing the catalytic converters. Because guess what? Regardless of whether or not someone is ever found in possession or found in the act of stealing a catalytic converter, regardless, we are saying that auto dealers, scrap yards, they are responsible. They are responsible to spend tens of millions of dollars on identification. So we're putting this massive expense to our businesses instead of putting the onus on the criminals who are committing this behavior. This fits just right in line with all of the nonsense we have seen from our Democrat friends this entire session. This is absurd. Madam Speaker, I apologize, I was out of the speaker. Has a roll call been requested on this? Okay, good. I'm glad that we will at least be on the record, because this is wild. I mean, we have seen this over and over and over again. A public safety bill just a few days ago not doing anything to actually deal with criminals and crime. And here we are in this bill, not dealing with criminals and crime. No, we're going to put more expensive regulations on businesses that frankly have nothing to do with the crime. The businesses that we are forcing accountability for this have nothing to do with the crime. And they're the ones we are making pay the bill. This is bizarre and nonsense. Members, I strongly encourage a no vote on this amendment.
The member from Lyon, Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Richardson yield for question?
Representative Richardson, will you yield?
Yes.
She will yield. Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Richardson, with the dawn of the internet and just the change of the business, auto dealers have really held the pressure. They've been small business owners, they're family-owned business owners. Some of them are larger, some of them are smaller. But one of the issues that we're seeing is kind of the onset of online sales, and particularly sites like Carvana, where you're essentially a dealer site that doesn't necessarily take possession of the deal, but they do sell it in the same manner as an auto dealer. How does this bill equate with that type of a sales system? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this bill would require that in Minnesota, prior to there being a sale, there would be a requirement that catalytic converters would be marked so that they would be able to be tracked. And so in terms of the way that the transactions would work, they would continue to be the same transactions. It would just require that there would be marking and records retention.
Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And would Representative Richardson yield for another question?
She will yield. Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Richardson, just kind of, the uniqueness of a car being stowed potentially at home, never actually going to a dealer's lot, but potentially being brought together such as an eBay, but also, where that site is acting as the auto dealer. How will that relationship interact with the car and the dealer, which would be an online that maybe actually doesn't take physical possession of a vehicle?
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In terms of requirements within this bill, what it really does is it looks at the ability to be able to track, to ensure that law enforcement has the ability to be able to run through either VINs or some other alternative vehicle numbering system to track when there are transactions that occur. And it also ensures that there is documentation that is in place to ensure that there's compliance with the sessions.
Representative Swedzinski.
Madam Speaker, it just seems like this potentially is going to be rife with problems if you were to use an online sales site where they don't physically actually take the vehicle, and that's a worry, folks. What have we seen in the vehicle market here in the state of Minnesota, but also nationally? We've seen used vehicles because of the Biden administration and its trade policies, the Biden administration and its complete dropping of the way economics work here in Minnesota and also the United States. Things are haywire, folks. Demands on auto manufacturers through the chip shortage, and now this, $100 million. Representative Rasmussen spoke a little bit that, these dealers are going to be paying this. Well, we know that's not true. It's the single mothers. It's the small business owners. That's the people that's going to be spending the $100 million to make this bill come forward, because it's going to get passed on. You look at the tax innocence, the Democrats just passed their tax bill, and when they looked at cigarette taxes, they said about 80 to 90% of them get passed on, any business tax gets passed on to the consumer. To the consumer. This bill, this Richardson amendment, will not only put our native Minnesotan auto dealers at a disadvantage, but it also adds additional costs to families. If that's your goal, Representative Rasmussen gave you an out. He really did. He was looking out for the mom and pop shops. He was looking out for that single mother just trying to get a car to drive. And sadly, I'm guessing that this is probably part of a bigger problem. It is a problem. Catalytic converter theft is a big issue. But raising the costs for everyday families isn't the answer. We need to go after the criminals. We need to put those folks in jail. We need to make sure that they pay when you're convicted of have 3, 4 of these things in your trunk or whatever, that you're buying 3 or 4 catalytic converter replacements. But we're not. It's not happening. I haven't heard of a single person having their Cadillac converter replaced when they've been convicted of this. And, I'm sad to say, but at the end of the day, the people are going to pay more to be in Minnesota and put our auto dealers at a disadvantage. Thank you.
The member from Otter Tail, Representative Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And I would ask for a no vote on the Richardson amendment. Again, this is focused on going after small businesses and not focused on punishing criminals. And it's, as Representative Swazinski mentioned, this is $100 million in additional inflation. It's going to be a tax on auto dealers and on consumers. And I know that in my area, we don't have as many auto dealers as in Leader Winkler's district, but even in the district that I represent, it would be an additional $210,000 per year that would have to be paid by auto dealers and consumers. In Representative Sandsted's district, it'd be about $240,000 per year. And in Representative Listlegard's district, it'd be about $340,000 per year for those auto dealers and the consumers. So this is an issue not just for the Metro, but across the state of Minnesota. And so members, why do we want to add to the cost of businesses that are not engaged in catalytic converter theft? And instead, we need to focus on the criminals and prosecuting them and holding them accountable for the crimes that they're committing. So I would ask for a no vote on the Richardson amendment.
The member from Asante, Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. What order of business are we on? Oh, I'm sorry. This amendment, I agree with Representative Rasmussen and others that have spoken. This amendment is not helpful to actually solve the problem. And that's very consistent with what we've seen out of Democrats here on the House floor. They certainly don't want to do anything to punish any criminal. In fact, they want to reverse that and reduce punishments for criminals, let them out of jail, reduce sentences. They've been 1,000% consistent on that. And this amendment is absolutely the wrong approach and won't solve the problem. It just puts more undue cost on Minnesotans. We've seen their environmental policies where they literally don't want to mine here in the state of Minnesota, where we have the highest environmental standards in the world, but yet they still want to use their laptops and their iPhones, so they're creating a demand for products that create more mining jobs, frankly, by child slave labor in third world countries where they have zero environmental standards, and somehow they go home at night thinking they can sleep better because they're saving the world. And the reality is, this is just more examples of Democrats not even understanding the problem, let alone even trying to solve it. So a no vote would be the appropriate one on this, and maybe we can take another try in the future at actually trying to solve the problem. Thanks.
The member from Anoka, Representative Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I actually think that I have a really good understanding of this issue because unlike, I'm guessing, any other member, perhaps, like Representative Pinto also, and maybe Representative Moeller, I have prosecuted people for catalytic converter theft, and I have talked to law enforcement about the problem of catalytic converter theft, and I have talked to scrap dealers about catalytic converter theft. In fact, I'm wondering if anyone else on the other side has toured a scrap dealer. Have you ever been to a scrap dealer? I've seen some hands up. And so what you know is what I know, is that when you see catalytic converters at the scrapyard, they have a big box of them at the one I went to, and they all sitting there, and you can't tell which one came from a legitimate car and which one came stolen. It's impossible. They all look, as soon as they're off the vehicle, they look exactly the same. And so what law enforcement will tell you is markings are important. That's why last year we passed a bill out of this House that provided $400,000 for a catalytic converter marking program. And people can't get those markings fast enough. When they show up at a police department right now, they are gone the same day. That's how much demand there are for these markings from your constituents. They understand the value of this. Law enforcement understands the value of this. I called my local police department to see if they would be interested in participating in the catalytic converter marking program. They were overjoyed. We can't wait to do that. It's important. It works. Because Representative Swazinski kind of hit the nail on the head. You get someone with a trunk that's got 3 or 4 catalytic converters, unmarked catalytic converters in it. How are we supposed to know where those came from? Are they stolen or not? Representative Pinto, Representative Moeller, no. It's hard to prosecute someone for stealing if you can't prove they actually stole something. It's hard to prosecute someone for receiving stolen property if you can't prove the property was stolen. So marking ends up being really important. What's also important is that this bill actually makes it a crime. The amendment that you are about to vote against, I guess, makes it criminal to possess a catalytic converter unless you can prove it's lawfully obtained. You want to talk about holding criminals accountable? This amendment closes a loophole in law that makes it difficult to get the person who's got 3 or 4 stolen catalytic converters in their trunk of their car. This is what solves the problem. We hear a lot of tough talk from the other side of this chamber about how serious they are about crime and how tough they are about crime, but apparently the moment there's a slightest burden on a business, whoop, nope, we don't want to do that, can't do that. That's too much, that's overboard. If you want to be serious about handling catalytic converter theft, you've got to take it at every step of the equation. Absolutely prosecute people who steal catalytic converters. I have done it, okay? Absolutely. Dry up the market. That's also very important. Go talk to a regular person about catalytic converter theft. They'll tell you, what are you guys doing about the scrap dealers? We got to stop the places where people can buy this stuff. And just one last thing about these big numbers you're hearing thrown around about the cost. There's a few problems with that. Number one, we had testimony in committee. Testifier came and said, this is very expensive. Marking one car costs $10. So we asked the Commerce Department, which is buying these markings, in the same hearing, how much are you guys paying for them? Because again, we appropriated money last year to pay for the markers, less than $3 a pop. So less than a third the cost of what was claimed. And oh, remember what I just said a second ago? We just bought $400,000 worth of these stickers. I'm pretty sure we'd be willing to give them to the dealers if they asked. The costs are way out of proportion. They're not accurate. Catalytic converter thefts are happening 1 a day in the city of Coon Rapids, thousands a year across the state. People are demanding action. It is astonishing to me that there's a single member in this body who's about to vote no.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm just shocked. I am shocked because I could replay everything you just said in the last 5 minutes, and I will ask you the question, where were you Friday night? Where were you Friday night when I was making those same arguments about people dying from fentanyl and now an increased penalty? And it's hard to, everybody, Representative Baker, we were talking about how hard it was to prove sale and possession's important. Where were you? That argument could be made. I'm sorry, I just can't believe I was sitting here listening to that after what we had to sit through Friday night. Going back to the issue of the catalytic converters, I talked to Commerce, and I guess I have to put out I'll put out my bona fides again. I've investigated catalytic converter thefts. It's hard to prove, kind of like sale of fentanyl. But anyway, yeah, it's hard to prove. And you know what the problem is now? They're just cracking the catalytic converters. The shell isn't the problem. The thing they're stealing the catalytic converters for isn't for the shell. That's like saying we're going to mark a walnut and make it highly illegal to possess a walnut. Well, if that's all we have to do, you know what they're going to do? They're going to do the same thing that they're doing with the catalytic converters. They crack the converters, they pull out the essential elements, tying into something Representative Doubt brought up. Some of the, depending on which manufacturer makes the catalytic converter, platinum, nickel that we could have here in a great supply, but we won't. So you know what you're doing? We can come up with a number, we can track. Representative Stevenson, I absolutely agree that it's a good idea to put VIN numbers on the catalytic converters. Will it help? Yes. Will it stop the sophisticated ones? No. All they'll do is just take the precious metals to the dealer. I had a bill that would, in here, we addressed it a little bit more. You had the bill last session or whenever it was when we have to keep track of who's selling the catalytic converters at these dealers, but it's not online. If Joe the catalytic converter theft goes down to a scrap yard in St. Paul and sells it, but he stole it in St. Cloud and they want to track it down, St. Cloud's got to go down and look at the records. I had a bill that would require to put them online. I didn't get a hearing. It's not in anybody's omnibus bills. I can't hear you.
Representative Novotny, you have the floor.
If you want to do something about catalytic converter thefts right now, we should have the ability to track, so we can put a number on it. It doesn't matter. That's a great thing. We're not going to catch the smart ones. We're not going to catch the smart ones with the improvements that we've made to the system. We need to have online monitoring of people selling precious metals, just like we do with pawn shops. That would solve it. Nobody wanted to hear my bill. Thank you.
The author of the amendment, Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just want to be really clear that in terms of the work that has gone into this amendment, it is based on a resolution that was done by the International Association of Auto Theft Investigators. And this amendment centers the voices of law enforcement. It centers the voices of the insurance industry and other businesses who are working together to combat vehicle crimes. There was a statement made on the floor that people are just leaving Minnesota and going to other states to sell catalytic converters. And that's happening, but it's also happening here in Minnesota. Here in Otter Tail County, there was an individual who stole more than 150 catalytic converters, and he went to the same scrap dealer in the same community multiple times. He was there 2 to 3 times a week selling these stolen catalytic converters to the tune of over $50,000. So it's happening here in Minnesota. And that happened here under the current laws that we have on the books. So the status quo is ensuring that we're continuing to see people continuing to steal hundreds of catalytic converters and making money on those sales. It's also really important to recognize as well, what we're hearing from law enforcement is they're pulling people over, and they have people who are driving around cars with lots of cut catalytic converters, but there's no mechanism, there's no method in the law for them to hold those folks accountable or to enforce the law. This amendment gives them that ability to do that. So members, we know that catalytic converter theft has been on the rise here in Minnesota and in other states as well. And here is an opportunity to ensure that we're doing something balanced that includes holding those accountable who are stealing them, but also ensuring those who are profiting off of these stolen catalytic converters also play a role in ensuring that we can curb this act. So with that, members, I would ask for a green vote.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. Will the clerk call the names of those members who have not yet voted?
Bernardi.
Bernardi, aye.
Bernardi, aye. Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss, no. Damath.
Damath, no.
Damath, no. Hausman.
Hausman, aye.
Houseman, aye. Her.
Her, aye.
Her, aye. Pearson. Pearson. Ryer.
Ryer, aye.
Ryer, aye. Schumacher.
Schumacher, no.
Schumacher, no. Thompson. Thompson.
Thompson, no. Thompson, aye. I'm sorry. Thompson, aye.
Thompson, aye. Pearson.
Pearson, no.
Pearson, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 69 ayes and 62 nays, the motion prevails and the amendment is adopted.